So, no surprise that in this next session we're going to be looking at how to give that high street the well-needed boost, whether it's regenerating it, doing something different. How do we make them more relevant for shoppers? How do we encourage more shoppers back to them? And the panellists for this one are Peter Schofield, who is Director General for Neighbourhoods at the Department for Communities and Local Government, Councillor Vidhi Mohan, who's from Croydon Council, Neil Varnham, who's Managing Director of Pradera, and Mark Williams, Director of Heart Group and Chair of the Distressed Retail Taskforce. So, as we have seen with the last two panels, I will get each of them just to give us their thoughts in a few minutes in terms of their views on this area, and then we'll move again into a panel discussion. So, Peter, do you want to kick things off for us?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I mean, obviously, as we heard from the Chancellor earlier today, the economy is turning round, and overall, retail itself has seen some general increase in volumes over recent years. Volumes up October to October by 1.8%, for example. But of course, as is well known, the structure of retail is changing, and as online takes a greater share of the retail cake, so the ability for retail to play a very strong role in regeneration, particularly in town centres, becomes less. Town centres, as I think you'll have heard from the previous panellists, are clearly a very important part of the economy. They are vital in terms of being a visible sign of economic growth. They are also important in terms of giving people a sense of space and place. They are the heart of communities. They are the place that people think of in terms of home, in terms of where they belong in many ways. So they're not only important in terms of the economy and regeneration of the economy, they're also, and being a visible sense of that, they're also an important part of community. And so very much the government's approach is to help to give town centres a future vibrant role in a world in which retail will inevitably play less of a part. And what you've seen today with the Chancellor's announcements on business rates, so I was interested to hear the glass half empty sort of response from many of the previous panellists. I arrived halfway through. But I mean, the glass half full approach is this is very much a measure in which government is listening to the comments that have been made, particularly by retail. Not only is there a benefit to all payers of business rates, but there are target elements, particularly to retail, particularly to small shops and to small cafes, restaurants and pubs. So the business rate package is designed to help retail through the transition, but also what we're seeing through reforms to planning is creating a framework, creating a toolkit that enables local leaders to help to reshape high streets and town centres, help to enable them to be more less reliant on retail and more responsive to changing consumer and societal trends. So the ability to bring more housing into town centres, to bring more leisure, hospitality, indeed we may see more public services delivered from town centres, and retail playing a role but not playing the same dominant role as before. And what the government would really see here is a role of local leaders, whether it be local enterprise partnerships, whether it be local authorities, whether it be local town centre managers. So using the toolkit, using the framework that government is providing to help to reshape their town centres in a way that gives them the best opportunity to be competitive, and also to provide the sort of visible sign of economic vibrancy and remaining at the heart of community life going forward. So it's about providing a framework and also empowering local leaders to make decisions at a local level.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we heard Jerry talking in the last panel about Croydon and what they're doing there. So Vidhi, do you want to tell us what you're doing?
Okay, thank you. I'm Vidhi Mohan. I'm Croydon's Cabinet Member for Economic Development. Now, most of you would have heard of Croydon. Hopefully, all good things, but maybe some not so good. But I mean, we are the largest local authority in London. We've got a population of about 370,000, and we are the 8th largest urban local authority in the UK. So we're very large. Even though we're part of London, we're very large on our own. Now, the big thing really that's happened over the last few weeks is that a few weeks ago the council gave planning permission to a joint venture of Westfield and Hammerson to build the next big retail centre in London, in Croydon. So it's over £1 billion of investment, which will literally transform our town centre with a new retail come leisure come housing development. And this will regenerate our town, it will bring in jobs and the associated benefits. But so really exciting times for us, but I think we're really keen that in terms of the high streets and the SMEs, that the benefits of this regeneration are felt there as well. Because Croydon, apart from a big town centre, we also have 8 very large district centres, and we're really keen that two things. One is that the retail development itself is SME friendly and is able to bring in units are available for independent businesses, and we're also keen that the benefits cascade down to the high streets. What I want to sort of outline today to you is just give you a flavour of what we are doing as a local authority in terms of helping businesses in the high streets and regenerating our high streets. The first thing, we are undertaking a high streets improvement scheme, which is being funded by the GLA and the Mayor of London, focusing on 4 of our district centres. Now, the main elements of this are improvement in the public realm in terms of the paving and the improvement in the shop fronts and generally decluttering of the high street, so that it has a more sort of cleaner, neater look and feel to it. As I said, funding businesses to improve shop fronts. The previous panel talked about the business rates relief scheme, which we are operating for SMEs. Now, this is of course focused just in the town centre, but it is a scheme funded by the Mayor of London. We initially started it as a 3-year tapering scheme, but now we've moved on to a 1-year 100% relief. And someone was asking about how many businesses actually benefited. I don't have the numbers with me, but we can provide you with the information. But yes, new businesses have moved into the town centre and additional jobs have been created. So it is something that there has been a take-up of. The other things we are doing as part of the high streets improvement is providing capacity building and training to businesses. We have appointed a dedicated retail support officer. So even in these sort of difficult economic times in terms of local authority funding, we have actually kept our economic development team in Croydon with one officer dedicated to offer retail support. And we also have an enterprise loan fund, as well as helping and supporting businesses, small businesses in appointing apprentices. The other thing is the issue in high streets in Croydon and I suppose all around the country is about empty units. And obviously we are really keen to bring these back to use. So we've got a whole program of developing pop-up shops and meanwhile use of businesses, of units. So what the council has been doing is actually taking up the tenancies from the landlord, then fitting out the empty units and then letting them out to businesses for very short-term use. And it's not just businesses, but also community groups, social enterprises, local arts groups. So just to ensure that high street units are back to use rather than staying empty. And we've also developed an online meanwhile use toolkit which businesses can use. And obviously we all suffer from this issue of more and more betting shops on the high street or payday loan companies. But again, as a local authority, I think we are restricted by the planning laws, and obviously moving from one class to another is permitted within the planning law. So there's very little control we as a local authority can have. But I think the issue there is, would you rather see a betting shop or would you rather see an empty unit? I think there's a trade-off which we all have to think about. The other issue on the high streets is, especially from a resident and shopper's perspective, is about parking. This always comes up, not just in Croydon, but all over the country. What we have introduced is 30 minutes free parking for in our district centres, so shoppers can come, pick up, do a quick shop and move away. We have looked at trying to put in additional parking bays in district centres so that there's more parking provision, and also looking at better ways of payment for parking in terms of mobile payment or through credit cards or whatever, so that you don't have to just have a parking meter where you put coins. The third thing which we are really keen on, and it's something the lady mentioned, is about BIDs, business improvement districts. We have one major business improvement district in the Croydon town centre. That's a really large one. But I'm really keen to roll out these business BIDs to all our district centres. We have one more, which was recently formed in New Addington. But I think it is really a good way of businesses to come together to get some funds where they can use funds under their control, which they can use to actually regenerate their businesses and help their district centres. And we are looking to working with the the Association of British Bids to try to bring businesses together in all our district centres and try to educate them on the merit of actually coming together and forming bids. And of course, Croydon was also one fortunate recipient of the Porter's pilot money, and that is being used to develop one of our local markets, a street market in Surrey Street, where they're looking at creating a food hub. So there are things going on. I think that as a local authority, there is a lot we're doing to regenerate our high streets and help businesses. Especially working with SMEs, trying to work with the landlords, especially when it comes around the issues around empty properties, helping to regenerate and develop the physical infrastructure to make the high streets look better, and trying to work with local residents. I think that's really important. It's not just about businesses. I think you have to realize that residents are equally important in that, because what we want is our high streets to then once again become destinations, somewhere where people actually want to go, and not just so businesses, community groups, as well as local residents will benefit. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Vidhi. And Neil, give us a sense of what does create a good environment on a high street.
Yeah, certainly will. For anyone who's come in late, we're not these people.
Yeah. Let me see if I can do something with that. There we go.
I may come at this slightly differently, so just sort of give you a bit of perspective about what's my background. So I've actually been in retail for 38 years. For anyone doing the maths, I started when I was 6. But I was involved in sort of regeneration projects with many local authority groups in the regeneration of Birmingham through the development of the Bullring Shopping Centre and Buchanan Galleries in Glasgow. In 2010, I was president of BCSC, and I've worked on the Gold Awards panel judging sort of retail schemes up and down the country for many, many years. But interestingly, when I was thinking about this session, I realised I'd actually presided over one of the early high street retail funds as well, which was a decade ago, but equally I presided over the sale of hundreds and hundreds of high street shops, simply because as an investor in putting clients' money into these, I can't get the returns unless they're managed properly. But retail is so significant to the economy. I mean, basically, you've got retail is the third largest employment sector in the UK with about 5 million people. So we've got to keep focusing on getting the answer right. Now, in the high street, to me, the big issue is about not just sort of dealing with public realm, albeit very, very important. It's about actually what does the retailer want? Retailers want certain sizes of spaces, they want certain ambience, they want all sorts of things. Most of the retailers that I speak to today do not want to go into the high street, and it is simply because they can't get the space that they want in the high street. And it's a problem with secondary shopping centres as well. It isn't confined to the high street. There are too many small shops that do not meet the requirements of the retailer of today. So the high street challenges are, effectively as I look at it, there's no strategic master plan with regard to the tenant mix. And I'm talking about here, I'm talking about leisure, I'm talking about retail, I'm talking about municipal social services, I'm talking about all of those. there is no master plan. Now, one of the weaknesses is that the planning issue that you referred to is the planning regime does not allow you to control the way that you set your high street up. Yet within a shopping centre, we can absolutely control that, and therefore we can deal with tenant adjacencies, the right tenant mix, because at the end of the day, a high street has got to appeal to the customer. If it doesn't appeal to the customer, no one is going to go there. And getting the tenant mix right, in right size units, and getting the sort of adjacencies as well, and getting the food and beverage in there is absolutely vital. Now, you've got fragmented ownership. So long gone are the days when many of the funds used to own hundreds of stores in shops in an individual town. But nevertheless, if there could be a change in or an adaptation of planning, then you've got to deal with getting the master plan right for leasing. It is about creating an ambience, and I'm not trying to sort of create a Westfield Stratford when I say that, but you've got to embrace all of the elements. The public realm is very, very important, but the way that things are managed, you've got to create a brand. A high street has got to look at being a brand and what is its unique selling point. And it's got to try and deal with marketing, it's got to try and deal with events. Events might be individual markets, exhibitions, kiosks, music. There's got to be a reason to go. Today there are too many conflicts as to why you don't go as a shopper to certain locations. Shopping used to be a functional activity, now it is a leisure activity. And unless high streets adapt and change to being a leisure activity in the broadest sense of that, and getting the whole of that brand approach, creating the ambience, creating activities, reasons to go and visit, there isn't a way back. But equally, I think there's a major skill shortage in local authorities, and I think Simon mentioned this earlier. There is a major skill shortage in local authorities to asset manage the high streets. Now, there's got to be a way around that because the skill's out in the market, but no one's applying it in the right location. So even when you come to marketing of a scheme, a shopping centre scheme, today all the new marketing techniques are used. I want to know about all of the data about my shoppers. I want to use the social networking sites. I want to use blogs. I want to use all of those to attract my customer to a location at a time and communicate with a customer. So, we've got to embrace all of those things going forward rather than just small elements of it. And it's got to be done in a holistic approach.
Okay, thanks very much, Neil. And now we go to Mark on the area of distressed high streets.
Thanks, Stephanie. Some background. The Taskforce arose out of a request, basically in response to the government's comments on the Porter's Review. And the industry was asked to set up a working group to look at and make recommendations on what we can do to rejuvenate the town centres. It was the first time that we brought together a very diverse group of bodies ranging from retailers, investors, banks, local authorities, plus key advisors, some of whom are here. I'll read out the full list because of the relevance. It included the Association of Chief Estate Surveyors, that's local authorities, Association of Property Lenders, that's banks, Bookseller Organisation, British Council of Shopping Centres, British Property Federation, British Retail Consortium, Investment Property Forum, Estate Lending Forum, Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, plus organisations such as Brockton Capital, GL Hearn, Gloucester LEP, Hark, L&G, Javelin, Next, Scottish Widows, RBS. We also had HM Treasury, BIS, DCLG and the Local Government Association as active observers. So they weren't signed up to the report, but they were very heavily involved. We looked at the issues impacting our town centres, both in terms of blockages as well as how we can reuse it as a method of rejuvenation. The work took over a year, was heavily research-based. It cost over 6 figures to produce, mainly funded by BCSC. Collier's led that research, but it included extensive consultation, huge amount of analysis, and trust me, plenty of debate. We launched the report, Stephanie may be interested, last Thursday in Stockton-on-Tees, and the conclusions and recommendations, and this is the bit I'm most proud about, were unanimous. There were 3 core conclusions. The first, given the massive change in consumer shopping habits and the internet, there are simply far too many shops in town centres. That's not a short-term economic issue, it is a life-changing event. Secondly, the required scale of redevelopment and large-scale remodelling of our towns and cities is similar to the Victorian era or the building boom after the Second World War. Thirdly, putting mixed use back into our town centres needs to be planned. It is not an ad hoc approach. The places must be areas where people want to live, work, eat, and, yes, shop. So, we narrowed our recommendations down, and I'll list them. The report is available, but it really echoes a lot of what everyone has been saying in both sessions. First of all, strong and dynamic leadership is required by local authorities to plan their centres going forward. Secondly, bold and aggressive use of CPO powers, you won't believe the amount of debate on that subject, is likely due to the scale of change needed. There's no point in pussyfooting around it. The issue of fragmented land ownership is a major issue. If it can be done voluntary, fantastic. But if not, then we need to have the process of stepping in. Secondly, we need to recognise the viability gap of some of the projects, and we need to widen the use of infrastructure funds. We met with the ministers this morning on this subject. The current infrastructure definitions do not include property, but we also need to encourage local authorities to use those rainy day reserves. Trust me, it's raining. TIFs. TIFs are a great idea. The problem is they work in the United States because the tax incremental is judged based on the increase in additional revenue because property is revalued every year. Because that doesn't happen over here, the incremental change can't be measured. Agree, complete when Simon made the comment earlier, address local authority resourcing issues. This is not a criticism of local authorities. Quite frankly, I think we'd be questioning as taxpayers why every local authority in the land had a team capable of remodelling their town for the next 50 years. You don't have those resources sitting there twiddling their thumbs, but we need that resource, so we need to look at and how that can be pooled. Absolutely strengthen the town centre first policy by looking at the impact of outer centre changes and how town centres can be better suited. If the town centre is not suitable, the answer cannot be building it out of town. It must be about knocking down and rejuvenating the town centre. That's not an out-of-town policy. It's merely recognising that where applications are made, they have to be considered in terms of the impact it has. Town centres must take advantage of technology, and there were a lot of good ideas that came through on that. I admit I'm not a technology freak, but it's in there. We said review the rating system. Well, so we can tick that one off. It seems that things are moving, and we clearly endorse that. And then finally, looking inward, the industry must review the new valuation guidelines, recognising the change particularly in secondary property, and the RICS is behind that and going to lead on it. Overall, we consider that we need bold and strategic change to get this improvement through. The government is listening, and I say that dialogue has started. We worked with government through this process. It isn't going to happen overnight, and clearly I think the reality is it needs to be planned for the next Parliament rather than this. But if we believe in it, we need to keep the subject up there in the headlines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. I just want to come back to you, Neil, first of all. Just on this idea of, I mean, it's been mentioned by nearly all of you about this idea of mixed use and having lots of different tenants. How do you do that?
Well, yeah, local or town centres do have these uses, but they're just not put together in a structured way. So the natural thing that has occurred over the last X number of years is your cinemas have gone out of town because it's big boxes. Your quality drive-through F&B has disappeared and it's out of town. I think what you've got to do is you've got to look at your town centre as if you are looking at a coordinated, well-run shopping centre, and look at all those mixes and master plan your town. It comes back to what Mark was saying. You've got to do that first, and then you've got to work out what CPO powers that you need to put into place to actually make that happen. But you've literally got to go through the whole of the food and beverage and the leisure and the social or the local authority municipal services and the retail, and plan properly for the high street.
But Vidhi, is that possible? Because from what you were saying, if a betting shop wants to fill a space and 5 betting shops want to fill 5 units, you would fill them with them rather than leave them empty.
Well, I think in terms of the betting shops, it's not for us to fill. If somebody wants to change the use from within retail, they can do it. The local authority doesn't have the power to stop them. But can I just talk about this issue about master planning? What we're doing in Croydon is we have actually divided our town centre into, we've got 4 or 5 master plans just covering the town centre, and it is all, all of them seek to deliver mixed-use developments in those plan areas. So I think in terms of how do we actually deliver a mixed-use town centres, it is, from a local authority perspective, it's through the planning process. So we've got a lot of empty office stock in Croydon, which is in a 1950s, 60s built. It's not fit for purpose as office stock today. And what we're encouraging developers to do is to come and convert them into housing. And I think that's so what we want in a town centre is not just full of offices and retail, but actually have housing and a community living there. Because if a community lives there, people take ownership of the town centre. You get the ancillary businesses like bars and cafes and all opening, and then it keeps away sort of the drunks and the sort of antisocial elements at night, because there's actually somebody living there. But from a local authority perspective, I think it's through the planning process.
Yeah, and how easy is that to do, Mark?
What, in terms of?
To change the premises into houses, and to be able to do that, encourage people. I mean, often, living in the town centre in some areas is seen as living in the rough bit of the place. In Middlesbrough, if you live in the town centre,
It stops it.
you'll be lucky if your car's still there when you leave. Anyway, I love Middlesbrough, though, by the way.
We agree. If you do it on an ad hoc basis, first of all, you're not going to get the private sector getting involved in converting a former Woolworths first floor into flats. Secondly, the environment you create by doing that is not particularly attractive. You need scale, both to make it economically viable and to create a nice, good, decent, planned environment. That has to come from the local authority in terms of setting out what they want for their town in terms of that master planning. Once you've set that master planning, then we are suggesting that the planning regime should then allow that use to happen within those zones, so that the freedom, because obviously the master planning goes through a proper planning process, but then allow those changes to happen quickly. I think the reality of getting the sort of the betting shops or charity shops is because people are desperate to fill surplus space, which quite frankly shouldn't be there in the first place now.
Peter, you're nodding along there.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the point I was making earlier about government creating the frameworks and the toolkit, and then local leaders making the most of that. I mean, we've introduced a permitted development right that allows empty office space to be converted more easily into housing, and we're seeing people taking that up, and we're seeing the result of that. That's turning, exactly as Vidhi was saying, it's turning empty office space into housing, which can bring its own sort of vibrancy. I mean, the other point I would want to emphasise as well is the importance of accessibility of the town centre, and parking is a key part of accessibility. I mean, one of the reasons why the out-of-town development is attractive to consumers is they know that they can go and they can park and they can, it's easy to get there. So actually, local leaders thinking about parking and parking arrangements within the context of their overall plan is, I think, a key part of the mix.
Yeah, whenever I talk about retail on the programme, about what do you think could save the high street, more than anything, it's about parking. The tweets and texts and emails that we get in.
Can I add a comment on that? It's interesting talking to retailers, because retailers are being driven by their own, by the internet and everything, to the out-of-town locations. And it is because click and collect. Unless they're looking at click and collect and multimodal shopping patterns That drives their performance, and they are going to continue to go out of town until local authorities look at car parking as being an attractor rather than a revenue-generating source. It's got that swingometer's got to change. Otherwise, retailers, there's no reason for retailers. That it's going internet. So we've got to come back with it on the high street and work out how we deal with it.
And Vidhi, on parking, you're saying you've been doing this scheme of 30 minutes free.
Yeah, it's 30 minutes free in our district centres. Certainly has helped. I mean, in terms of bringing in people to the district centres. But in terms of local authorities, yes, we've got to balance our books as well. So it's. And the other thing about parking is sometimes you get both views. There's two things. There's the cost of parking, but there's also the number of parking spaces. And the people you talk to, sometimes you've got both issues in the sense. Some people say, oh, there are not enough spaces, and some people say it's too costly. So it's a balance.
Yeah, and Peter, I just want to come back to a point you made there about changing properties or former offices into houses and into housing. Isn't there a danger though that it can't be the right housing anymore because we have too many flats and not enough actual houses? Isn't there will there be the demand for it? Isn't there a danger that you end up creating something that ends up as an empty shell because not that many people want to live in flats anymore? People are looking for more houses.
I think there's a big variation. I mean, I think there's a demand for all sorts of different types of housing. I mean, my answer to that would be, I don't think a developer is going to make the investment in converting an empty office into flats if they don't see the demand. And I think there will be demand locally for those types of property. Actually, I would say as a result of welfare reforms, there's an increasing interest in smaller properties in some cases, particularly on the affordable side. But no, I think what we should be doing here is about providing flexibility and opportunity for developers to see the demand and to invest and create the space that they need.
The other thing whenever I talk about retail that often retailers say to me is if I'm in an area that's a high street that's distressed, let's say, one of their big problems is they're very close to another high street and that's where they lose their trade to. So is there a danger as well about having too many high streets near each other? Can they all thrive, as it were? I mean do you want to pick up on that, Neil?
Well, that's an interesting question. Mark said earlier on there are too many shops in the UK, and there are. So we've got to take a large number of shops out of retail use to get the supply-demand balance. We can't cross off town centres across our map. That'd be really quite good if we could start again and get the catchment analysis right. But they are always going to overlap. So that's just a de facto. That's there. I think you've just got to work with that and work out what is Town A is offering something to its local community, and Town B that might be 3 miles down the road is offering something to its community.
But if Town A does a mix of things, so it's got retail, it's got housing, it's got bars and cafes.
And Town B doesn't do it.
What can Town B do that's different?
Well, it might not need to do it different. It's just got to make sure that it does it at the same time. Otherwise, everyone's going to drive the 3 miles down the road.
So it goes half then?
Yeah.
Anyone want to make a comment on that? Or differing opinions?
Shopping habits have changed. So the retail hierarchy that we all learned through college has shifted. There's a huge polarisation to major dominant city centres. I mean, it's a fact, or it's a statistic. I think we've built, I didn't come up with this, but something like 300 blue waters in England since 1974. I mean, we've just got simply too much. But the big cities and places I suspect like Croydon will draw people in. The suburbs around there will change. People still want to go there. We launched it specifically in Stockton. Stockton has the longest high street in the country. Actually has a very vibrant covered shopping centre that was busy. The journalists there was flabbergasted. But you go outside, and I swear we saw 3 people down this high street.
I was there last week, in fact, filming.
Right. So the question is then what do you do with that? So there is a need in a town like that for good quality convenience shopping. There isn't a need, because the consumers are voting with their feet, for mass market comparison shopping. They would there go to Teesside Retail Park or Middlesbrough. So you then look at, well, what happens to that space? And that's where the answers will vary, but it'll be about either housing or bars and restaurants, or it might just be landscaping or parking, a whole range of things which each local authority will decide for themselves. But it's not about trying to compete with another town. It's about meeting the need of that town in the right way.
That Stockton is a very poor area, though, in terms of, you know...
It is, but there's employment, and also the people that live there, one, they're very loyal. I mean, the fact is that in this country, we don't have huge mobility, particularly in the northern region, but American investors, one of the first questions they ask us over here is, well, will a town depopulate? Will a town disappear? Because it happens in America, because there's huge mobility, because they don't have the welfare state. So if they are unemployed, they have to move. With the welfare state here, keeps communities together. People have a very strong historical regard to the location they're in. So these towns do need to have something, to meet their needs. And it might be a poor area, but they still deserve good facilities. There is still employment there, and in fact the business park is right on its doorstep, which is expanding.
Yeah, I didn't mean as in they didn't deserve it, but more, could they afford would they add value in terms of, would they be able to buy the things of what would be in the high street?
Well, they clearly are buying things, because they're buying on a convenience basis. But they're splitting that spend between a big dominant centre, the internet, and the convenient shopping. So what we have to do is provide what's suitable, what they want in that town, and then look at the rest of the use for something else. Okay,
I think it's probably time that I let you have a go with the questions. Does anybody like to ask a question? Yes, the gentleman over here. We'll just get the microphone to you.
Hi, I'm Shailesh from Healthy Planet, and we've got pop-up locations, including a Books for Free centre in Stockton. So just picking on Stockton, has anyone actually looked at things like the fact that there's a growing age of population, there's going to be more medical care, attention, all those sorts of things where they want to go to a convenient and a larger location, not just a GP? And is that part of the mix of what you can do with a high street? All those sorts of aspects.
I think it most definitely is. I mean, the silver pound is the fastest growing part of our sector. So, our communities have got to react to that, because that is what, but I can't remember what the stats are. It's something like sort of 40% of the people will be sort of over 60 in about sort of 15 years' time. But you've got to adapt your local authority, towns, etc., to meet that type of community, most definitely.
I mean, the other thing that's happening in London is the Met Police, because of the cuts they have to make, they are sort of closing a lot of their police stations and selling off they're sort of rationalising their property portfolio. So obviously that's the other thing we're looking at, is whether certain sort of contact points between the police and the public can be established on a sort of pop-up shop basis in some of the high streets. So yes, and also it's not just about sort of retail use of the pop-up shops, but also community groups that provide or charities that provide some of the sort of services for the elderly or whoever else. So yes, we are looking at other uses.
But the pop-ups are interesting because you should take those one step further, and you probably do think about them as incubator opportunities as well for new retailers to have a go at these sorts of things. But that then comes back to business rates, because someone's got to give some amnesty to that, to regenerate and create growth in that sector. But again, high streets have an opportunity to do that. I'm not an expert on this, but I think local authorities have the flexibility to do that. They just don't use their powers.
I was also going to add, I think there's an opportunity to use space in town centres to meet the sort of needs of older people in terms of housing, in terms of access to public services, and I think that there is a way of sort of bringing that together so that you address the accessibility needs and you can enable older people to live independently for longer. I think there's a real opportunity here to use the space in the high streets for that as well, if we bring more housing in and if we bring public services in alongside retail and other traditional uses.
Okay, would anyone else like to ask another question? Gentleman here. might be worth one of the microphone people staying down the front just to save your legs.
Mike Higginson from Travers. Mark, what's the future for the task force? You've gathered a good group of people together. You've made some very strong recommendations. For every council like Croydon that has got a positive attitude to this and the resources to do it, there must be many councils that haven't got the money, haven't got the resources. Is there political will to implement these recommendations? Do you have a future role in producing a model to show how these could be resourced, how it could be funded, what powers would be needed to create the sort of town centre management that Neil talked about?
Well, first of all, the task force had a limited lifespan. It was set up for a specific task, which it's done. I don't think any member of the task force signed up for the next 10 years to, certainly I didn't. It does it acts as a beacon in terms of the publicity that comes from it. But what we want to do is make sure that every one of the recommendations we will be allocating, ensuring that there is an organisation that is taking it forward. That could be the RICS on one, it could be BPF, it doesn't matter, but there will be an allocation. It has been suggested to us very strongly by ministers that if the points are kept on the agenda, the objective must be to put it into the party manifestos for the next election. Because the reality is, where there's required legislation, then it's not going to happen in this Parliament, it's going to happen in the next, and that will be driven by the popularity of the subject. And it's quite clear, property is not the most popular subject out there, but this topic has caught the public imagination because people feel there's a real need to do something. So we must ensure that what we're saying is picked up by people who will keep it in the public profile, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the task force that will do that. BCSC, who acted as the secretariat, will be working with those organisations and with government departments and the officials. And as I have to say, it has been an eye-opening experience in terms of how helpful the departments have been, even if they're not signing off the report. They're definitely independent of it, but have been very constructive. And that dialogue is being encouraged. So I'm optimistic, but I'd be a fool to assume it's going to be accepted and recommended and just adopted overnight. It won't. It requires continual pressure.
Go on, Vidhi.
Just on the Croydon example, you said the Croydon has the resources to do it. I mean, some of the money we've got is from the Mayor of London, which is it's a clear funding. But in terms of the town centre, most of the town centre management is actually funded by the Croydon bid. And that's why I think the bids are really important, because it actually creates a pot of money. Of course, they have large rateable value, so they collect a significant amount of money. They have a town centre manager. They pay for extra cleaning. They pay for extra police. So they have the money to do that. But obviously, some of the smaller district centres won't be able to. But in terms of funding for the town centre management, most of it comes from the private sector and the businesses. The council's resources are quite limited.
Can I just say, just want to say that very much applaud the work that Mark and his team have done, and very much welcome the way that you've brought these recommendations together. You're probably right in terms of the timescales we're talking about, but you've given us a profile and also a kind of analytical base, which makes it very powerful. And I think this is something that we'll be taking forward. But whereas I don't know that we would want to necessarily hold Mark and any one of the individuals to a sort of 10-year sort of sentence in terms of helping us on this, what I just wanted to emphasise is the importance of bringing together that group of people and the different backgrounds and specialisms and sector expertise that we've got here. And I think going forward, what we will need is to continue to draw on the experience and expertise and specialisms that came together for the distressed retail property task force, so that we can sort of keep the thinking up to date, keep the challenge up to date as well, as we go through what will be, I think, a lengthy transition to the future vibrant high streets that we want to see in the future.
And just to pick up on this point about the time it's going to take to regenerate, isn't part of the problem that a lot of businesses and politicians are quite short-termist, and therefore, you know, to see the financial gain or the economic gain is difficult when it takes so long to do something?
I mean, obviously, you know, there's a short-term horizon here as well. But I go back to my point at the beginning about the sort of the visibility and profile of town centres for the local communities, and that's something that matters to people over the long term. I think, you know, whoever is in power in a local council, whoever is in power in Whitehall, will have to respond to the wishes of local communities, and local communities want to see their town centres vibrant and healthy and the centre of community life. So I think that we'll see some initiatives that have a short-term impact, but I think we'll also see investment for the long term, and I think local communities will hold the politicians to that sort of timescale.
Okay.
I think it's just of the three stakeholder groups, the private sector, local authority and government. I mean, there are clearly short-term horizons, but first of all, the private sector as an industry is long-term, and their organisations, BPF being one of them, that represent them are clearly long-term. They're not set up for the short term. There are financial issues, and it's more how we appraise projects. There is the financing of some of these projects won't work on a traditional basis, which is why we've flagged the need to look at infrastructure funding gaps, which is a much longer term, working with local authorities where they can finance a shortfall over a 50-year period because of the benefit it brings to a town. So that it's marrying up short-term issues with long-term ones. So it's not easy, but there is a commitment by the organisations and the representative bodies to take it on a long-term basis. Inevitably, politicians will be focused on the next election, but they are suggesting privately that the longer we keep it on the agenda, then if they think it's going to be popular, they will support it. And I think that's why we've got to set our scope on the next election, making sure that all of these are taken forward, quite frankly, by all parties, so that whoever gets elected actually delivers on it.
Okay. Lady at the front here.
Hi, Liz Pease from the BPF. Fascinating discussion, and thank you very much, Mark, for leading the Distressed Town Centre Property Task Force. It's been an interesting experience. I wonder, Stephanie, if I could have two sort of bites at the cherry, one to the public sector representatives and one to the private sector. Public sector first. I'm really interested in this idea of getting different uses into high streets. You know, so an obvious one, it would seem at the moment, would be something like the new sort of health centres required by the clinical commissioning groups. Yeah. Who is the body who can, you know, knock the heads together to actually make this happen? Is it a local government thing? Is it a national government? Is it the NHS estates? Because it seems to be very, very difficult to actually get all the different sort of bits that need to talk to each other to make that happen. So that's the first question to the public sector pair. The two private sector representatives, and again this is another bee in my bonnet, is the private sector, are the landowners, are the property owners actually still being too greedy in terms of expectation about value and rents in high streets? Could we or would we actually see if there was a fall in value that would allow different sorts of people to move in, take advantage of the space, set up new, smaller, independent businesses? Because as you say, Neil, quite a lot of the high streets are not suitable for the big businesses that want to be in a different sort of box somewhere else. So we've got to somehow or other make it more attractive for different sorts of businesses and occupiers. So,
great. Well, Peter, do you want to kick off then on who decides?
Yeah.
Who's got the power?
And Vidhi may disagree when I say I should be local authorities. And I would very much like to see local authorities feeling empowered to take the lead in all of this. And you're right, Liz, that in some cases, you know, the land might be owned by the central government in some way. And there may be powers or flexibilities that local authorities don't have that they need in order to play that role. But I would love to see local authorities feeling empowered through the planning system, through health and social care and the sort of ownership that they will have of those budgets to do precisely what you've just described. through, and I've talked about parking and accessibility and those sorts of issues. I'd love local authorities to feel that they have the powers and the flexibilities to do that. And I think our role in central government is to respond to that. And, where, within reason, there are things that government can do to provide more flexibility, to devolve, to, let go of assets and property if that's part of the issue, then I think we should be doing that. But I don't think it's realistic, because, the devil is in the detail there. I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think it's right for central government to be seen to take the lead locality by locality. The other thing I just want to emphasise, I haven't said it already, but when you think beyond, when you look at sort of local economic, functional economic areas, actually the role of local enterprise partnerships here, we haven't really sort of seen, I don't think, LEPs thinking about their role in terms of high streets up until now. But in many ways, and in some cases, they will be the obvious forum because they bring local civic leaders and business leaders together. So that's another thing to think about in that context.
Vidhi, do you want to pick up on that?
Yes, I think you make a very important point. As the public health function has now come back to the local authorities through the sort of health and well-being boards and all, I think that's something we can certainly look at. Obviously, the government is also looking at devolving or taking functions away or trying to reduce pressure on A&E departments and trying to get people to actually not go to A&E but go to more local clinics. So certainly, I think that's a really interesting idea, and trying to see if more of these smaller pop-in clinics or dispensaries or whatever can be located on the high streets in empty units. Obviously there are planning issues and all that, but I think it's something we can certainly look at.
Okay, and moving on to the next question about whether private sector landowners are too greedy about their rental value, the property value. Neil, do you want to?
I don't think I am at all, Liz.
She did.
She did. No, I do know. She did. Honestly and truthfully, no. I think that I think as someone who has a number of assets, I'm not talking about a private investor here. I know that we look very, very flexibly at the basis of the transaction with a retailer to get a retailer in. More so now than ever before, we will look at a base rent, a turnover rent, we'll even look at a pure turnover rent, we'll give a big rent free to get them in. The problem still comes that when I talk to a retailer now, I only have a conversation about his total occupancy costs. And we've got this massive fixed bit of the business rates, and on the right-hand side, I can influence the other bits. No one on the left-hand side is doing anything to change. I, as a landlord, I'm having to adopt and adapt on the right-hand side of that equation to try and get them in. Now, so I think landlords are doing that in respect of where they own multi-ownerships. The problem comes is if you own a single unit in a high street, why would I possibly want to do that? I've got to respect my investors' money and I've got to give a return because that might be pension fund money and annuity returns, etc. And therefore, I'm going to take Betfred, etc., because I don't need to offer that. But that comes back to not having a coordinated tenant mix.
Okay. I think that the task force did actually address that question, and the research showed that first of all, rents have fallen, and that because obviously we have retailers on the task force, so they challenged it. Evidence rents have fallen, and there was no evidence that the landlord sector was preventing regeneration by propping up rents. Inevitably, you will always pick out bad examples, and quite frankly, they're not the institutions and they're not core property owners at all. We didn't go into it, but I'm sure there'll be bad examples, but not from what I would call the recognised property sector. So that the evidence was emphatic. That is not the reason for the issue. It's the fact you just can't fill them. One, because there isn't any demand, and then secondly, rates. There were plenty of examples where the occupancy cost was still so high, even if you gave it away for nothing. There is an issue on value in the secondary area, and trying to how we reappraise value for areas that are run down, that are how you manage and value for cash flow purposes. And to the RICS's credit, they are picking that up and are going to have a look at it. I don't think that's the reason that's stopping regeneration, but it's certainly an area that they're going to look at to ensure that it doesn't.
Okay. Just on the rates, I know we've talked a lot about business rates, but Vidhi, you say you're giving 100% rate relief for a year. Often with new businesses, the first year is fine, it's the second year that's a bit of a killer for lots of new businesses. I mean, how are you planning to deal with that?
Well, I think, as I said, initially our scheme was a 3-year scheme, sort of tapering. I think it was 70, 40, 30% off or something. But talking to businesses, I think the preference was for a one-off 100%. I mean, that was something which came out of our sort of when we consulted after we introduced the scheme. So, yeah.
So you're confident that they're not going to leave at the end?
Absolutely not. I mean, and I think with the other sort of regeneration coming into Croydon, I think there's enough incentive for them to stay on.
Okay. Would anyone like to ask another question? Probably got time for one or two more. Yes, gentleman in the far corner.
Thanks very much. If I to go back to the valuation question, I think the logic of master planning, and I think the scale of a master plan allows you to plan in those different uses, is key. And I think for some of these secondary high streets where I think there is an absolute clear consensus and a logic that that is necessary, I think the issue is where there are disparate ownerships. You might be asking one owner to take the loss for the high street. And they're not necessarily being greedy, but they're saying, well, why me? Because if I'm taking the hit to bring in a user that's not going to pay me any rent, but it's going to bring in footfall that everyone else is going to take the benefit from, I think one of the questions, and CPO is a way, but it's a very heavy-handed and it's a very long, drawn-out process to get to that stage. I think the question I'd ask the panel is maybe, are there any quicker, more efficient ways we can get to where we pool economic interests, where individuals are taking the collective view for a location, rather than being asked to do things in isolation, which therefore I think is part of that blocker, that people aren't all jumping in together.
Does anybody want to?
No, it's far too difficult. The first part of that, you're naturally drawn to saying that it's a conflict by creating the master plan and trying to get the balance with, somebody who might pay £30 zone A and someone who might pay 15 or whatever the numbers are. But at this point in time, I'm not talking about every high street. At this point in time, there are many high streets that simply have got so many vacancies that those people are sitting there. It's not about taking a hit. They've already taken the hit. It's about working to try and drive other retail uses and other mixed uses into the town. But I take the point. I think there is a conflict, and that then comes back to the whole issue of CPOs and master planning and planning issues and a whole range of other umbrella activities that have got to sit over the top. Is there a shortcut methodology? I think the only shortcut methodology that I can really think of is that you can still create your master plan. You're not asking people to remove tenant A to replace it with tenant B, but you're going the halfway house to sort of try to get some of that master plan put together and encourage some retailers. Because you can look at, it's not difficult to look at the unexpired lease term on some units and start to have a positive discussion with owners where I think you can get a number of steps down the road.
Okay. Before we end, I just want to do again some type of a conclusion to the day, I guess. So, what would be your bit of advice, or what you think the key thing is for high street regeneration, or town centre regeneration? I guess. Mark, I'm going to kick off with you because I know you've got loads of ideas.
Well, we set them out. I think it starts with strong local authority leadership. So I commend Croydon, and there were a number of other examples of local authorities doing exactly the same, setting out their vision for what they want in their towns. The private sector responding by recognising the world that we're now in and not using capacity models that are looking backwards but looking forwards. And I think it's recognising that we want towns that are... The word retail and town centre has somehow got mixed in together, and that we assume that town centres are being retail. They don't. They mean mixed use, and people want to go back to much wider mixed use town centres.
Okay. Peter.
Well, I would very much agree with Mark in terms of local leadership, but the point I would also want to stress is about thinking about the sort of the offer to the consumer, because this is all about being aware of changing consumer needs and wishes, and having an offer that works, you know, for future trends, and so I think it needs a sort of commercial dimension into it as well. It's not just it's a plan that this is what we'd like. It's a plan bearing in mind what the sort of commercial driver and which comes from consumer behaviour. So we've got town centres which have an offering that is going to appeal, and that then leads into all sorts of issues around mix, around accessibility, and around the sort of future demographic change, all the issues that we've talked about.
Vidhi.
Yeah. Again, I just want to echo what Mark has said and what's been said by a lot of people today, that retail is changing, and we've all got to recognise that, and I think that's why we need more sort of mixed-use developments both in our towns and our district centres. I think the local authorities are there to set the framework, especially through the planning process and through the master planning process, but ultimately the investment will have to come from the private sector, and the local authority has to work with the private sector, and not just investment for UK investors, but I think looking at investors abroad as well. And there are examples, especially in London, of foreign investors coming, and I think we need to sort of expand our horizons in terms of trying to bring investment into our town centres. And I think unless there's a proper sort of public-private partnership working, it's not going to succeed. And just before I end, may I just say, if any of you want to come to Croydon and see what we're doing, you're most welcome. I think it will be, perceptions apart. I think you'll see a very positive story. So you're all welcome. Please get in touch. I'm happy to take you around and show you what we're doing.
And take your wallets.
Spend money.
Yeah, exactly. Neil.
Again, just wanted to sound like a worn-out record. I echo exactly what Mark's task force has done, because I'm fully aware of that. But that is going to take time to put into place, and the time frame has already been discussed. So, yeah, that's a longer-term structural change that's needed. In the short term, I think, I would encourage local authorities to think about the product that they've got and the changing world around them with the internet. Think about marketing your product. You can still create your master plan now. That's not going to cost you a lot of money. So you can actually go through a number of steps, thinking about the brand, the marketing, and the master plan now, and you may be able to move some of those building blocks into place earlier than you might think.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all of our panellists, Neil Varnham, Councillor Vidhi Mohan, Peter Schofield and Mark Williams. Thank you very much.